State Street is known as that great street, but it's had its share of downturns over the decades. Modern tastes and innovations can raise a thoroughfare's profile, but also diminish its vintage charm. Mark Hirsch searches State Street for a clue to find the great street that existed even when life moved a lot more slowly.
I've always had an interest in photography and history and architecture. I wanted to recreate some old photographs, and I thought, well, what if I could actually combine the two? The picture actually has a title on it. This one was called State Street North from the Palmer House. So, okay, let's go to the Palmer House and let's see if we can find this exact shot. And as I look and I see, well, that's great because this building is actually still there. And it's great when there's a reference point that I can use to really frame my shot. Obviously a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't changed.
Amidst the glass skyscrapers and above the neon signs peeks the corner of a brick building.
That's it. That's the shot. And I finally come to the exact spot, and I sort of had that eureka moment. 110 years ago, a photographer stood on this very spot, a little box on a tripod, a blanket over his head, and he took that shot, poof, and then I go out and take the same shot, and I just think there's something magical about that.
The magic starts with the shooting and evolves through the editing.
So I've got all of my latest images.
He blends two photos with the exact perspective. It's not a simple Photoshop. To blend a moment in time a century apart requires art and science. Architectural angles must line up to weave horse-drawn and horsepower.
My ancestors came over from Eastern Europe, as many did. And just looking at old pictures that I have, actually some here, of the old country. And I just sort of became fascinated with imagery and the memories that it conjures up. I think it's that emotional connection that I have, that other people have too. I really try to give it that sense of realism that I think this really exemplifies it. So you've got a realistic transition of old and modern. The women with their parasols was a key component of this image that I wanted to save, but if I just chopped it down the middle, it would not be as interesting.
Yeah, in some ways it's almost haunting, right? These people have come back to life almost.
It is, and I just wonder, who were these people? What did they become? What is their story? I think a lot of people have told me, my grandmother used to be in that street. She used to go walking down State Street all the time, and I wonder if that's her in this picture.
LaSalle and Madison, the Chicago River, Michigan Avenue at Van Buren, Lakeshore Drive, and of course back to our landmark on State Street Hirsch is using to bridge 2 centuries. What is that old brick building?
The corner of the 3rd floor of the building contains the cornerstone of Chicago.
How about that?
Interesting. Well, yeah, because it's State and Madison.
Right.
It is the 0 point. That's interesting that that's the building that I use to be the focal point of this image.
The building is called the Chicago Building or Chicago Savings Bank Building. It was built in 1904 and located at what was once called the busiest intersection in Chicago, State and Madison.
So I'm just going to take the good part of the image and then I will paste it on top. And now I just sort of have to position it so that everything lines up. And that's where it just gets really, really, really detailed and eventually get everything sort of a rough cut first.
Chipping away at the
old photo, right, so that I can reveal the new photo underneath.
His time travel has taken him to many cities like Washington. This photo includes an image of the Washington Monument from 1905, and it looks like much hasn't changed at all. Here's East Capitol Street that same year. In Boston, this 1904 image shows Quincy Market. It's part of the Faneuil Hall Marketplace that opened in 1826. The Brooklyn Bridge was the longest suspension bridge in the world when it was built in 1883. This image is from 1905. From 1900, Jackson Square and Cathedral of St. Louis in New Orleans. The Field Columbian Museum was one of the main attractions of the 1893 Columbian Exposition. It's now called the Museum of Science and Industry. Well, yeah, I look at that and I think in some ways their lives were harder, and in some ways their lives were simpler and perhaps more enjoyable, less hectic.
Although I will say, a stroll down State Street in 1900, probably provides some of the same excitement as it does today.
Yeah.
They're shopping in different stores, but they're out for a nice stroll, and who knows what store they're going into back then.
His next project, resurrecting images from the Great Chicago Fire to give people perspective of what was lost and what was gained.
The new grid system in Chicago was designed, and Chicago really is today what it is almost because of the fire. So they always start with an original image, this one taken in 1900.
Primarily, he's focused on photos in the public domain. He hopes to shoot other buildings that inspire an emotional attachment, like universities and sports stadiums. But he doesn't have to just rely on photos. He's also using vintage paintings, like this shot of Boston Harbor looking towards Bunker Hill. What you won't find are Mark Hirsch t-shirts or calendars.
I'd really like my work to sort of stand alone as art and not get too cluttered with some of the other things.
He's not driven by a business plan, but by curiosity. Through science and art, he brings the past and present together as if it's one singular moment in time.
Once you find your passion at any age, you kind of know this is what I want to be doing now. I'd like to think that even in my middle age, I'm just getting started.